Bitcoin could reach more than 500K per coin by October 2025. So, I'm sure you guys have all seen the last week's episode of the All In podcast with those 4 venture capitalists. I watch it religiously ever since they've begun. And this last week, Chamath Palihapitiya, the residential crypto expert within those 4 in the All In podcast, went over his due diligence looking back at the history of Bitcoin after the halving and the returns after the halving from the last 3. I want to show you guys this because it's pretty powerful. So check it out. The first right here that you can see is Bitcoin has increased materially following each halving, with the bulk of returns realized between 12 and 18 months after the halving event. And so the key, if you look at the first one, is after the first halving, 1 month after for halving number 1, 2, and 3, 1 month after, about a 1x return, a little bit over a 1x return. 3 months after halving, now check this out, right? 3 months after halving, it's 2.5, 1.6, 1.3x. Let's go to a year. Look at the second to last. 12 months after the first halving, we had an 87% return, or 87x return. 12 months for the second halving, almost 5x. For the third halving, 6.5x. 18 months, check this out, 18 months, 45x, 27x, almost 8x. So that means if we take this for what it's worth right here, if we take this for what it's worth, this means, according to Chamath Palihapitiya's not financial advice and diligence, is that if we see anything near let's just say the last halving of 18 months after the last halving is 8x returns, let's just cut that in half. 4x returns for maybe this halving. We're sitting at 70,000 right now. 4 times 7, 280,000, 300,000, maybe. Check out this next one. This next one shows the first Bitcoin halving cycle saw materially superior returns compared to the following cycles, while cycles 2 and 3 follow a similar price pattern. Once again, we are showing 18 months out, everything is higher than when it split, or when we had the halving. And that's the point, is that there is a clear topography that diligence will show. And clearly you guys have known that I've been showing these types of graphs for almost a decade now. But it's nice to see other people waking up and creating visualizers that essentially show the same thing that you and I knew all the time or all along. Check out this last one. And I'll drop the video at the end of it so you can hear Chamath go through it, but totally worth. Last one. Bitcoin could reach more than 500K per coin by October 2025. Not financial advice, assuming it follows the same price patterns as cycles 2 and 3. So that's his assertion here. I've told you guys in a previous video, I see Bitcoin easily going to $1.90. I said about 200 would be nice, right? So either way, at 70, we're 2x, 2.5x where we are right now. I feel like that to be a great conservative target, a great conservative mental model to have, and I don't think it's outside of rational reason to believe that in 12 to 18 months, we will easily see a 2.5x. So 70 times 2, 140, maybe plus a half. You're looking at $1.70, $1.80, $1.90. Not bad. See what Chamath has to say about it.
Here's a little Bitcoin price analysis for you guys. So there's been a couple of halving cycles that have happened. And I asked him to go back and look at the price performance 1 month after a halving, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and 18 months after a halving. And what you notice is that there are these moments initially where essentially when you go through a Bitcoin halving, people are sort of reassessing what's happening and they're trying to figure it out. That's sort of what I would say happens in the first month, and roughly what also happens in the first 3 months. But then within 6 months to a year and 18 months of these things, there are these crazy price appreciation cycles that happen. So that's what this page shows, which is, 18 months after the first halving, the Bitcoin price returned 45x. After the second halving, it returned almost 28x. And after this third halving, it returned almost an 8x, which is really incredible returns in such a short period of time. If you go to the next page. And so if you graph that, this is what it starts to show, which is what is this price performance after each of these halving cycles. Now, why is that interesting? Well, it's interesting because on top of this halving, which theoretically, if history is a guide, we should see some price appreciation. Obviously, the other thing that's happened is we've commercialized Bitcoin. And we talked about this sort of as my big prediction for 2024, which is these ETFs are really going to allow Bitcoin to cross the chasm and have its sort of central key moment, right? And so if you apply the averages, and again, these are just averages, they're by no means predictions. Okay, so I just want to qualify that.
Yeah,
these are
this
just
is not financial advice.
It's not financial advice. These are just guesses.
Data.
We took these and we applied it to the price of Bitcoin. And if you go to the next page, you start to see what could happen if you just take the average of the last few cycles. So because the first cycle was so extreme, and you start to
so you're just doing cycle 2 and 3 here, to be clear.
Just the averages of cycle 2 and 3. And what you start to see is some really meaningful appreciation. And when I talked to Wences about this, how he explained it, which makes a lot of sense to me, is there are a lot of countries that will never look at Bitcoin credibly, even if they support it. The US may be one of those. But there's an increasing body of countries that will become dual currency. And they will look at their local currency, and then they will look at Bitcoin. And they will say both of these two things are needed. One, when you're transacting on a daily basis for random goods and services. And two, when you need to buy a permanent asset that needs to have residual value, you'll use something like BTC. And I think that's a very powerful concept. And if you look at what this price chart could indicate, is that if this thing starts to get to these levels of appreciation, it is going to completely replace gold and start to become something that has transactional utility for hard assets. And I think if you marry that with this worry that some folks have about dollar debasement, you start to see some really interesting opportunities. So I just thought that this was a interesting thing that he here's our disclaimer, interesting thing that he put me on. I thought I'd share that with you. I'll publish this on Twitter, but